Mhm. Hello, what have we here? And welcome to another episode of Star Wars Lawyer Sidebars, where we have conversations about the galaxy far, far away. And today, I'm touching on one of my favorite characters, Lando Calrissian. Feel like Lando is a very underrated and misunderstood character in this galaxy far, far away. And I wanted to talk to a few people that have written him to gather their insights on the life and times of Lando Calrissian. So I'm going to bring him in first. I'm going to bring in Danny Lore. How's it going, Danny?
Hey, how you doing, Chris? Excited to be
Good.
back.
Yes, we talked about this briefly on your There Are More of Us episode, and I'm glad that this has finally happened.
Love to talk about the coolest man in space.
Of course. And a second guest is also another author that has written Lando Calrissian, Adam Christopher.
Hello.
How's it going, Adam?
Good.
It's good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a while.
Yeah. So we have this man that has gone by many titles: Baron, Administrator, Scoundrel, General, Smuggler, and that's a lot to compact into one person, especially when they're not a main character, besides in certain stories that more revolve around him. So how do you feel like in your interactions with either your work or just with the media in general, how fans have interpreted Lando as a character or as a person?
I guess I'll start.
Yeah, go for it.
For me, Lando has always been that smirk. I think from the beginning, before any other role, he is the smirk and the flourish of the cape for me. Like that's what I remember growing up as. That's when talking to my dad about Star Wars, that's the part of the character that we always felt so deeply with. And I think it's always really interesting because one of the best things about both experiencing and working with a character who is so often like a grifter and a con man in a lot of ways is how much of that is intentional versus how much of that is natural charisma, and I think on a writing level as opposed to a fan level, that's what is the core of him to me, where that line of he naturally smiles and people walk alongside him versus he's fully 100% aware what he's doing, because if this mask drops, he loses his power in any situation.
Yeah, it's funny. I agree completely. Really, in the whole original trilogy, and I, am of the right age where I grew up watching it sort of in the early to mid 80s. For me, at that time, Lando was the first character who was different to what we had. Star Wars, in A New Hope, you've got the villain, who's the bad guy. You've got Luke, the innocent farm boy. You've got Han, the action hero. Leia, a really good female character who also plays a kind of damsel in distress. But then when you come to Empire and you have Lando, suddenly it's like, who is this guy? This is a different kind of person that is breaking free of those sort of stereotypical roles in a family action adventure movie. And I agree, from the first time that you see him, you know that he knows what he's doing. And what I mean by that is he's in control of himself and how other people kind of interact with him and perceive him. So it's that whole thing of it's natural charisma mixed with an act. But both of these things, almost contradictory, but they're actually both natural parts of his character, which makes him really interesting, and helped, of course, by the amazing performance of Billy Dee Williams, who I mean, everything that he does, he's the same, but like he kind of just makes it so easy and smooth and natural, no matter what's going on. And especially in Empire, you know, he flits between that whole kind of the administrator who's in charge and is trying to look after a city. He's trying to be smooth with Leia and kind of be like this handsome kind of swashbuckling figure with the cape and the smirk. And he's also trying to deal with Vader and Han. There's like the whole, you know, 4 or 5 different avenues of characterization all kind of coming together. But because of Billy D. Williams, it really sort of works.
One of the things that I really like that Adam said specifically was about how different he is from the rest of the cast. And I think that that's important in that even Han, who is like, you know, that rascal, you kind of know as a viewer, he's going to be one of the good guys from the beginning. And Star Wars is very much made of a lot of good guys and bad guys. And I think the interestingness of Lando a lot comes from you're introducing this person who used to be a rascal like Han, but is a politician and administrator when you see him. And is one of the few character introductions, I think, in the original trilogy, where you're not 100% sure where that character is going to land. That there is, you know, an alternate branching path where he doesn't make up for betraying Han. You know, where like it is not sure when you watch those opening scenes whether he's going to be a good guy or a bad guy. And I think that that's really interesting in the original trilogy, where there is this like intense like binary in terms of where the characters fall.
Yeah, and it's like it works because that character, when we meet him, he already exists separately to the Skywalker saga. Like when it's clear the Empire has kind of got hold of Cloud City and Vader's doing whatever Vader's doing. That scene where Lando's like, "Oh, they're not after you. They're after some guy called Luke Skywalker or something." And of course, for us at that moment, Luke Skywalker is like the main character of Star Wars, and suddenly we have this introduction where this guy is like he's on a parallel track. You know, he's now touching the Skywalker saga from our point of view, and that works because then it allows, as you say, it allows that kind of uncertainty where we don't know where his character is going to go, and he could equally be, you know, good or bad, or whatever decision that he makes, which is really, it's kind of fascinating, and it makes the galaxy bigger by sort of approaching it that way.
Yeah, and I want to get into the nitty gritty of Empire, because I feel like Orlando gets a bad rap for his decisions in that movie when you don't think of like the global context of what happens versus the linear context of the film. So Lando betrays Han from a certain point of view, as Obi-Wan would say. What do you think is going on in his head during the events before we see him, and the Empire and Boba Fett already beat Luke, Han and Leia there? And then what do you think is going on through his head while he's trying to orchestrate this maneuver he's trying to pull off?
Well, I think he's really, like, at the start, his first concern is with the city. And to be honest, Han is an acquaintance from the old days. And I don't know how much we know of the connection between when we see them in Solo, the movie, and then Empire Strikes Back. But it's kind of, to me, it's logical that his concern is for his city because, like, he's the Baron Administrator, he's in charge. I don't know what the population of Cloud City is, but it's like a lot of people. It's a big thing, and he's in charge and responsible. So he kind of like, he has no choice. You know, it's occupied by Imperial forces who are right there. What is he going to do? But I think, and also as the administrator, he's got dealings with the Empire because the Empire allows Cloud City to be sort of independent because it has certain value to the Empire. But also, he's smart enough to know that the Empire is doing not good things across the galaxy. Like, he's not naive or unknowing, but he's kind of like, well, it's a survival thing of he's surviving, the city's got to survive, he's looking after these people. And I think we do see in the movie, like, when kind of the penny drops that actually he needs to do something else because, you know, Vader keeps changing the deal, and it becomes clear that whatever they promised, like, they're not, you know, the stormtroopers are not going to leave the city. Like, that's it. They've come in to take over. And maybe he's seen that elsewhere as well. You know, there must be, you know, loads of kind of pockets of independent systems and stations and cities and whatever that the Empire's done this, because this is the Empire. It's a, you know, it's a kind of jackbooted fascist empire, which, yeah, Cloud City being independent and him running it is almost too good to be true. And maybe he's in a bit of denial, or has been in a bit of denial about that, but this is the point where, like, he knows that this is the end. So he makes the right decision. Which I think, like, I think that's all presented within Empire, and I think it's a logical progression. It's like, it's like this here, you know, he sells out Han and all this, but I mean, Star Wars is full of redemptive arcs. You know, he turns it around in Empire, and then we see his ultimate kind of, I mean, it's not really redemption, but like he kind of turns it around in Return of the Jedi and becomes one of the core characters of the original trilogy, even though he only appears, you know, halfway through Empire for the first time.
Mm.
What I think is interesting with Lando in that movie in particular is that, and this is a thing that I see a lot in various comics or large scale stories, especially sci-fi, right? We care deeply about Luke at this point. We also have to think Lando has no reason to care about Luke. And I think that is something that is very difficult, intentionally difficult for the audience, right? Is that he has lived this life, like Adam was saying, completely off screen, that does not center around these characters, right? His reactions come from kind of two things, I feel. One, it's he has promised the city something, right? And part of the reason I think it's difficult for people to really vibe with, very weird relation, but in Final Fantasy 15, one of my favorite messy games, one of the major complaints that people have had is that it's difficult to empathize with the destruction of Insomnia section because you never met the people of Insomnia. Mm. It doesn't mean that the characters are wrong in reacting strongly, right? It's just the fact that the beginning of the game has them sneaking out the back, and then the next thing we hear is it's destroyed, and we've never seen, do they care about Noctis? Do they care about these characters? And I think that some people also have that psychological reaction with Cloud City. Mm. If you don't see how Cloud City functions day to day, it doesn't feel like he's actually made a promise to anyone. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean, and this isn't like a flaw in Star Wars. There are so many characters, right? Mm-hmm. You don't actually need to see it, but it becomes this psychological tug that I actually like. I don't think it's a plot hole. I think it's intentional. You're supposed to be very frustrated with him, and you're supposed to empathize more with Luke and with Han, right? And then I think the other half is what his relationship to Han really is at that point. You know, Adam's talking about it being an old acquaintance, but it's also, think of Han's reaction to the Force at the beginning, right? Where he's just like, this is silly. So you have some of that in terms of like, why should Lando think that he needs to protect these characters, right? But you also have his last encounter with Han. At that point, when he's protecting a city, there's no real reason for him to emotionally engage with the idea that Han is fighting for something greater at this point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So even if he wants to side with his friend, even if he wants to protect his friend, they have the sort of friendship that they have no reason to fully 100% trust each other at any given time, at this point. And especially with the idea that Han would want something greater. And so for Lando, he sees himself as protecting all of these people. And, we can have strong opinions about when he makes what decision he makes. I am a Lando lover that goes, okay, but this is how fascist regimes work. Like you can't make a deal with people who you have no power over, and like that's the situation he's in, like they have no reason to abide by deals. But I think that that's what makes the character great. He has so many reasons to only, like, the only people he sees himself as needing to side with in the movies at that point is the Cloud City people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are many good reasons from his perspective why those are the only people he needs to protect at that point.
Yeah. And I think, when you're talking about that trust, or that Han or Lando wouldn't think the other is thinking of something bigger, Han even says it on their way there, where Leia says, like, we're going to a mining colony, and Han is like, yeah, to Bana gas mine. Lando conned somebody out of it, like that even shows like, oh yeah, well, this is just like the next score for him, versus, when they get there and Lando's saying like, well, no, I'm in the realm of the legitimate now. And Han's like, yeah, okay, buddy.
It's literally two con men pointing at each other and says, but I'm legit now. And getting upset that the other one doesn't understand that it's true. Like, and it's that moment. It's just unfortunate for both of them that the stakes are so much bigger. Like normally their stakes for a con is, with the exception of, movie beats. Oh, my life is at risk if this con fails, but both of them are in a situation just kind of Spider-Man pointing at each other meme, and being at a stage where they've matured so much separate from each other that it's hard to remember that it's possible the other has matured separately.
Mm-hmm. This is a funny, like, a subplot for this question. How do you think that dinner went after the door closed and it's Vader and Boba Fett, Leia, Han, Lando, Chewie just kind of like sitting there with food there? How do you think that conversation went?
People seem to be more and more interested in this meal. I've noticed over the last couple of years, like people trying to work out what's on the table and like what was going on. Because Vader can't eat. I don't think we see some stormtroopers, but there's no like Imperial officers. It's definitely just for the Falcon crew that turn up. I don't know. It would be. They just sat there in silence, I'm sure. Probably for like 2 hours. Vader just sitting there, and the rest of them just sitting there. Because I can't actually remember what's the next scene where we see them. They just get thrown into the quarters, I think.
Yeah, I think the next time you see them, Lando walks in, and that's when, like Han punches him and Chewie roars and all that.
Because I think probably like that meal, it's difficult to know when the Empire, like when Vader arrived, because like did Lando set that up, and like because he obviously got word that they were on their way, so like he's like, okay, I'm gonna like have a nice dinner, with my old friend, and then because Vader showed up, it's like, well, Vader doesn't care. But Vader didn't even notice that the table was like set or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Oh, because there was a Empire fact pop story about, or at least Lando talking to his chef about that the meal was only for appearances. I forgot. I'm looking at my notes.
Right.
And the chef only had an hour to cook the meal before everybody arrived.
So I'm of two minds here, because I feel like part of the interest in the dinner comes from kind of the change in storytelling styles that we have now. And I mean that in terms of it's a post-political dark comedy, political Adam Sorkin-esque writing that I think that a more modern version of the movie has you fill in that scene for a lot of people. And I think that that's where the interest comes from.
Mm-hmm.
For me, for most of my life, though, it never occurred to me that they actually got to have dinner. Like, it just never, like, my reading for that scene is the terrifying, the terror of the moment is that Vader sits there.
Mm-hmm.
But the door closing is you hearing the scream in a horror movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's much worse in your imagination than actually seeing what happens.
Like for me, the joining us like threat is it's Vader thinking he's very clever and play on words.
Anakin Skywalker showing out strong.
Yeah, like it's a moment of joining us means you don't leave this room.
You're like,
like that energy. So I kind of like the potential of both. I like Schrodinger's dinner. Obviously, the idea of sitting there and force them to talk. But I think it's also very likely that it would have been very similar to Vader in the early moments with Leia, where he's trying to get info and there's nothing, and then he gets angry, and that's what happened,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Boba being there, period, cancels out the idea that they were ever going to sit down.
I just imagine I just imagine Boba Fett they get to eat the dinner and Boba Fett doesn't get to eat anything. He just has to stand there and watch.
Yeah. Because I actually wonder if I haven't read it, but I don't know if the scene exists in Lee Brackett's original script for Empire, because I mean, from what I know about it, it was much more inspired by classic fantasy fiction than Star Wars that we know. And it just strikes me as the kind of scene where the hero party, powerless in the castle of the villain, is forced to have this really awkward meal with the villain, while the villain, expounds their views and the fact that they've got power over the heroes. Because you then transpose it into the Star Wars setting, you've now got Vader who can't eat because he's wearing a helmet, and you got Boba Fett who's not going to take his helmet off. So it kind of almost feels like a leftover, but I don't know. I haven't actually read this. I haven't read the Lee Brackett script, but it seems like a very high fantasy sort of moment.
I think it went, like I did look it up because I was like, I feel like I saw this before, is that there's like a slight extension into the room where there is a bit of questioning.
Right.
Which makes sense to me because, like, as people have pointed out, like, they're just at the point of being tortured later. They're not being asked questions, which means it probably already happened.
Yeah.
Well, I found the Lee Brackett script and I'm currently scrolling through it. It's totally different because it's more of a built up village versus this mining colony, and it's more, I think, more fantastical than space or science fiction-y. Yeah. Not saying anything about the dinner though. Not yet anyway. But so now I want to get into the character and you all's influences when writing them. Someone asked about, because both of you had the added knowledge of having Donald Glover having played Lando when you had written your stories. And so my friend May asked, how is having two actors play the role affecting or evolved the character and how you envisioned them when you wrote them?
I mean, for me, I'm a comics writer. Like, so I am used to many voices and many actors. In this case, the acting being the combination of artists, interpretation, writers, etc. Like, that's a pretty standard setup for me, and in a lot of ways, that's true with most of the Star Wars characters in general, right? As a general rule, I like picking one voice that I hear in my head, but that's more so that that's my test for, does it sound like that character would say it? And because of when I was writing the story, when Lando becomes a general, it made sense for it to be Billy's voice.
Mm-hmm.
If I was writing younger, I might, decide that I wanted it to, to be closer to like Glover's voice. But the exact moment like that inspired that story, the exchange with Han, at the briefing, I was like, this inspired that moment, so that's the voice that I'm going to use going into it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't inform it. It's just in the same way as multiple actors inform it, in the same way as, I was reading, I had just reread Daniel Jose Older's Han and Lando book. Mm-hmm. I had just read the Lando comics miniseries right before writing that. So they kind of all equally, because it is all different voices to me.
Yeah, I was definitely Billy D. Williams, but almost not his portrayal in Empire or Return of the Jedi. It was more later films that he did, like Batman. And
mm-hmm.
There's one in the 90s, and I cannot remember the title, but he was kind of the perfect age for the character in my book, because obviously Shadow of the Sith is set, I always forget, like 13 years after Return of the Jedi or something. So he's, whatever age he is. Because like even, in Billy D's movies, he kind of gets this, his gravitas kind of increases, as it would, because he's such a good actor. And Batman was one I watched quite a lot. Well, that's funny. In the book, I actually managed to get Donald Glover's portrayal in, because I have Lando looking at one of the old Calrissian chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of hollow recording, and it was fun to do, because it was not only the two versions of Lando in the same scene, but the older version of Lando was kind of like, wow, was I ever that young and flashy and good looking, and but what I loved about Donald Glover, and yeah, you're right, what Danny was saying about how it doesn't, even if it's not directly influenced, it doesn't form what you do. In Solo, the thing about recasting, for whatever reason, is that like the actor never really wants to do an impersonation of the original, because what's the point? They need to do a version of the character which is their own performance, their own original performance, but which is true to the character that they're portraying. And Donald Glover does this really good thing where the first time we encounter Lando in Solo is we just hear the voice because he's in the other room, and the first couple of lines is absolutely 100% a Billy D. Williams impersonation, like just down to the syllables, everything. And then as we see him kind of in person, and then as the film progresses, it becomes more and more Danny Glover, less Billy Dee Williams, more Danny Glover, which is brilliant because then it allows him to do, his interpretation of Lando as a character. But for some reason, that opening dialogue that you hear and he's out of sight always has stuck with me because, as Danny would know, writing a character like Lando, because he's so different to the other characters in Star Wars, because he's so well played on screen, and because of the kind of character he is, you really have to capture that in writing, whether it's in the comic or in prose. Like, it has to be right, because not saying that he's an extreme character, but the more defined the character is that people know and love, the more they need to, or the more they expect to see that in whatever they're reading. In a way, when I was writing Luke, it was kind of easier because, as amazing as Mark Hamill is, Luke, in comparison with Lando, is a much more straightforward, linear kind of character. He's the good guy. He's like, doesn't really have a sense of humor, sort of. There's a certain pleasant blandness to Luke.
He's an everyman to start with, which is easy. Which is
right.
It's both easier and harder because it's easier to put your own spin on it, but at the same time, that means like you have to continue to write an everyman, but make them an individual.
Exactly. And then Lando is different. Like, he is so finely crafted.
He's Lando from the jump.
Yeah.
Like when you see on a personality level, when you see Luke, there are so many branching paths there, like in terms of, because he's younger, right? To a certain degree, and we are watching him evolve into the person he's going to become, which is a little different than Lando, who is older and is going to still mature and change. But he's Lando at the beginning, and he's Lando at the end of like the original trilogy. I think it's something that's interesting when you are working with a character and you have Donald and you have Billy, is trying to figure out which word I want to use where. They're the same character, but because they are such different ages and at such different stages in their lives, they are not the same person.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And by that I mean even what's nice about having a younger actor, like come in and do a prequel in some ways, is that they do have to make the decisions of in what ways is he the Lando we know from the trilogy already, and in what ways has he not become that man. And so they are the same character, but if I'm writing, like the short I wrote where he's the general, he's not the same person. He would not make the same decisions in that, he would not have the same reactions to things. He would not interact with the world and also absorb the world in the same way as Donald Glover's Lando. And that's not even because it's different actors. It's because that's what happens. If I'm, nearing 40 now, if I am a different person than I was when I was 20. I'm a different person than when I was 10, etc. But I am still Danny. And I think that's difficult sometimes to explain when you're explaining your process of what you pull from different aspects of canon and why. Because some of it is the parts of the character that appeals to you, and then it's the others of this is the version of the character that would make these decisions. And it's not like I'm cherry picking. It's Lando here is a grown-ass man. Lando in Solo thinks he's a grown-ass man, and I think that's like a very big difference, like he has not become the man who would end up not draining Cloud City for all it's worth and going, because I'm absolutely 100% sure that young Lando would have been the person that Han expected to see there. That would have been like, oh, I'm waiting until I get the most out of these resources and then I'm out.
Yeah, and I think that's going to transition well into my next question, because one of my friends, Master Allen, Level Up Lightsabers, he, as a father himself, recognizes that Lando is one of the few good fathers we have in Star Wars. And it's interesting because both your stories are almost perfectly bookended to the point where he does become a father. Because Danny, you write him in Return of the Jedi, which is for ABY. And Adam, although you touch briefly on while he is a father via memory, your book takes place about 8 years after he becomes a father. So how do you think, Danny on his path to becoming a father, like your story affects him when he becomes a father, and then Adam, the kind of man he is once he is a father?
I think to a certain degree that even at my point in my story, he is in no way prepared for fatherhood. And so like, it's a weird question to ask. And that's also just on the flip side of he's not going to be ready until he has to be ready. But I also think that I think the things that prepare Lando the most for fatherhood is how often he's had to not reinvent, but re-understand himself as a man. Through his and I think that that's something that, while I'm not a parent, that when I talk to my friends who are parents, when I think about my relation even to my younger sister or my younger cousins, the more time that I have spent understanding who I am and why I make the decisions I am, the better prepared I am to deal with younger individuals that I feel protective over. And it is obviously more so in parenthood, I think that the thing that most prepares him is he's already had to become so many different versions of himself. And not on a con man level, but on a coming to accept himself as, Baron Administrator, as a general, as someone who saw himself as wanting to be neutral, but then deciding that there was no real neutrality. Like, making those decisions before parenthood, I think, is the closest thing to preparation that he really has.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned different versions of himself, because when you meet him years later in 21 ABY, he's another version of himself again, which is a version that he never really wanted. Well, he never wanted to be that version, because I had to write Lando as a kind of destroyed character, because what is the most unimaginable, terrible thing that he could have gone through, which is losing his daughter, because she was kidnapped by the First Order. So it's, in a way, it's kind of, I know it's like a fate worse than death, because like there's no closure, there's no end. He's totally powerless, and it's wrecked him. Like he's wrecked. Now, when you see him in Shadow, when you first meet him in Shadow, he's back in a gambling den doing old Lando things. Like he's regressed back to maybe even pre-Empire, how he used to be, because that is the only way that he can deal with what's happened, because it's the only place where he feels he has control. Like, his life is out of control, and he can't. So not only has his daughter been stolen, kidnapped, but like he can't find her, and he's spent all this time, 6 years, looking for her, and like there's just nothing. So he either kind of, it would either kill you or you find a way to cope. So that's why he's kind of regressed a little bit. But it's through what happens in the book and being reunited with Luke that kind of brings him back to where he should be, which then ultimately at the end leads to the reason why he stays on Pisana, because it's like, okay, now we're back in it. Like, this is a sector of the galaxy I haven't searched, so I'm going to stay here and keep at it, trusting that Luke can deal with whatever Luke has to deal with, because they kind of, they separate obviously at the end of the book. But yeah, so it's that weird version where he's completely in the wrong place. It's interesting because like when you write, tie-in fiction, IP stuff, you never get the opportunity to change characters because whatever you write, it has to slot back into wherever the story slots into.
They have to go back to neutral. Whatever neutral is for them.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to reset, and and I've done a lot of work where that's the case. Like, it's reset. Whatever happens, back to neutral, fine. But because this, Shadow of the Sith is set in that period where like there's hardly any Star Wars storytelling yet, and like right in the middle of the big gap between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, it's like, well, Luke's path is kind of obvious because we know, and we see a bit of it in the Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian, like what his path is. But then we know what happened to him because we know he's secluded himself and cut himself off because of what happened to Ben. And we know Lando from when we see him in The Rise of Skywalker. So it was kind of like I had to fill in the gap between when we last saw them and when we see them next, which is, I feel very lucky to be able to do that because, like I said, you never get to do that to established characters. So creating a new version of Lando, which is, as Danny said, is a character that has had many versions. It was kind of cool and difficult.
It's funny. No, in case it's not clear, I spent the way that I engage a lot with media I love is like the red strings connecting it to like other things I love. And I feel like a lot of the ways that we're discussing Lando right now relate, for me at least, to the reasons I love Hellblazer.
Mm-hmm.
He is a character that very much gets, in ways that not all characters get, very, very high highs and very, very low lows. And part of the fun of Lando and some of the reason both Constantine and Lando can do this is because they've got that grifting spirit, right? So like there's a way, it's the gambler, right? So their lives have that pacing of, fighting against the house winning, constantly. And I love, as a writer, getting to play in that, because even if you have to set him to whatever his neutral is still on like that kind of razor jagged line in a lot of ways. So there's big extremes that you can take him to before the rubber band like snaps him back to neutral. Mm-hmm. that I feel like, say for example, I love Leia. Leia is very centered, is very anchored, when her roles change, when she reacts to things, she is always Leia, right? She is always that version, and there's a lot less rubber banding. Mm-hmm. I feel in the ways that she is as a person than Lando, or even like Luke, because he does like the light and dark side. You don't really get the middle parts. You get either the extreme, like either ends of the extreme. Lando gets to kind of have that whole spectrum of sometimes you're up a little, sometimes you're really down, and I think that is also one of the things that allows him to be a very interesting father figure, right? Because being a parent and being part of a family in that way means that there's someone in there who is rapidly changing, even if they're not with you, because those young years are rapidly changing constantly, and he is a character that can move with that ebb and flow without having to be static, which I think is a problem of parents in general in fiction, is that they become static. And Lando, with who he is, doesn't need to be that.
One version of Lando that I'm interested in, that I hope they let somebody write soon, is like Clone Wars era Lando. Because I didn't realize this until a couple of years ago, because I always imagined that Han and Lando are more or less the same age. Lando, pretty much every time we see him on screen, is the oldest human character by at least a decade. He's a couple years older than Anakin. So, you know, he would have been a fully, or not a fully fledged adult, but he would have been in his 20s in the Clone Wars. I think that'd be a very interesting story to tell.
Yeah,
I agree.
Totally. I didn't even thought of that. Yeah, brilliant.
I think the most interesting part of that would be he's the oldest in age, but the nature of his life means, is he remotely grown at that point? You know, like I was making the jokes about him in Solo, you know, the way that he is older than them, but the nature of his gambling, messy life is that he's not necessarily grown yet. But he is grown and reckless in a way that I think is really interesting to me, especially since the one thing that would likely be very true of that, regardless of who took on that story, is that either naturally or willfully he is not taking sides at that point. You know, like, what does that look like? You know, like there's a lot of options there, and all of them are chaos.
And it also makes me wonder, because the Star Wars has like thrown like some hints, and I think it was something that was adapted over from Legends of Canon. Like in Legends, at least, Palpatine knew about the Calrissian family, and he remarked it as tragic. Which, like, for Palpatine to say something tragic, like, what happened? And then I think they've kind of brought that detail over into canon. But I kind of imagine Lando at that age similar to Matt Damon's character in the Ocean trilogies. Like, you know, he'll have like those older mentors, but he's like that, you know, younger scoundrel trying to prove himself, trying way too hard until he like finds that natural smile. And I feel like that's when his life, you know, goes down the path he at least tries to want it to. Yeah. So, like with the events of Rise of Skywalker, you know, Lando's in his 80s. He's one of the few remaining rebel leaders from the original trilogy. I think Mon Mothma is still alive, and then Wedge is alive. What kind of version of Lando do you think that is, being brought back into the fight after really thinking he was kind of done with it?
I mean, he seems it always, to me, it feels like he was waiting on Persona for too long. And again, another version of Lando, like he gets whatever he was doing between Shadow of the Sith and The Rise of Skywalker, when he's searching, you know, he's reignited his search for his daughter, which we know is ultimately fruitless because he still doesn't know anything in The Rise of Skywalker. He's quite quick and quite keen to get back into it because he rescues Rey because he got the signal from Leia. Leia knew how to reach him, and he was quite receptive to being reached. And then we see him back, and he's doing his bit, which is like, you know, rounding up everybody that they know to bring them to Exegol. And again, I wonder if it's this thing where does he maybe it's a character flaw, I don't know, does he slip back into old roles easily because they are more comfortable versions of himself? So, like, if in Shadow of the Sith he slips back into, well, he has slipped back into being a gambler and the kind of the sly grin and the wink of an eye because that's comfortable and he can control it. If he's on Persona for too long, he's back as the rebel general easily with a wink and a smile. And even in the Rise of Skywalker, when he appears back on the rebel base, he feels like an old-fashioned character. Like he's this old cowboy that's come out of the West to help the youngsters.
One of the things that I really liked about that portrayal is I feel like it feels as intentional as Lando always has been. That Lando walked in going, so there's Leia, who has just been on the clock for many, many years, right? Then you have Han, who's gone through all of his stuff when we saw him in the first one. And then you're also looking for like the original team, Luke, who has run away from the perception of himself as a hero. Lando, on the other hand, is very much that man of, I want, even if they didn't know my name when I walked in that room, they were going to know that they should know my name. And I feel I feel like he is in, Lando himself is intentionally playing the role of a general here. And I think that it is that old hyper awareness, that old, he is always aware of how he's being perceived, and sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's his ego, sometimes, I think there's a lot there. I also can't help but feel like there is a lot of stay ready, get ready kind of happening with him, that in order for him to call in people, he never stopped checking in. That even if he pretended to himself that he was not doing that, he never stopped fully, hustling. Like it's was it the old Neuromancer lines about like the treading the surface and the way that they describe hustling in Night City, like that there's just some things that he will always do because that is the skill set that has always kept him alive. And that is his connections. That is being ready, that is being able to play the role of Lando, whatever is the Lando that will be most impressive in the room.
Yeah, and it's interesting that before the movie came out, I think it's in the Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary or art book or something, like the character of Lando that we see on Persona was called the Hermit because he's in that helmet, which we know is Comat's helmet, and then it was revealed to be Lando. But like in a way, that's kind of like an unhelpful kind of deflection to kind of hide spoilers, because he wasn't a hermit. Like he was living on Persona, and he got to know the people of Persona because that's Lando. Like he's always in there and kind of giving it 100%. But he's also searching for his daughter. So like he's maintaining the connections and the network across the galaxy. And it's just like you said, it's like it's what he does. And that may be a part of his character where he doesn't even really know he's doing it, because that's the natural thing. Like he's in on Cloud City with the people and like serving them and helping them. He's on Persona and he's part of the community on Persona, but he's also searching the galaxy, and he's got all the different planets and all the different way stations and all the different locations and people that he still knows. And that's that's Lando. It's kind of reductive, but like that's Lando.
Like, yeah, I get it's like my headcanon for him has always been to a certain degree because the galaxy is so large. There's always some people in the galaxy at every point in time that know him, but not as Lando.
Mm.
Like, so for me, like him being the hermit, I was like, he could have been the hermit to some people. Some people
right,
like that,
yeah.
like in the same way that, like, you know, Batman also had, you know, like was it Malone? Like you know, like there was always
Malone.
yeah, you know, like always had different names because again, that is in line with the exact skill set that has always had him survive, you know. That when he calls in favors, for example, maybe he's calling in favors and not all of them know him as Lando, you know, like, or they didn't always know him as Lando, you know. I think that some of the him known as Lando, him known as the general, like all of these things are formed from the perspective of most Star Wars content, you know, is that he often comes across the same people in the stories that they tell. So of course he's not going to pretend to be someone else in front of Leia, you know, like not without giving her, you know, like a quick sign before they go in the room or something, you know, like that when you tell long-standing stories like this, you have the fact that certain characters who might be more deceitful usually are more honest to the reader and to the cast than maybe they ever really are.
Well, I only have a few more questions for you. The next one I feel like is fun. And so I'm going to say for like each trilogy's like main cast of characters, we'll keep it with heroes only. Who would Lando's favorite person be in like the prequel trilogy main cast of characters? Who is his favorite person in the original trilogy main cast of characters? And who will be his favorite in the sequel trilogy main cast of characters?
Lando.
It's true.
I mean, to be fair, regardless what his actual answer is, that would be what he told you.
Mm-hmm.
He would be very good friends with Jar Jar Binks. Like they would get on well.
Do you realize how much information he would have because Jar Jar ended up telling him things? Like, I genuinely just like he would know every bit of gossip about everyone because he is the person that has like charmed it out of, like, he's just like, if I sit here and we just goof off for a while, I know like everything about everyone in politics. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like he would have mixed feelings about judging all the kids because they're kids to him. He might see some of himself, I think, in Poe a little bit. But just more in the Poe can keep up with him in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, at least for me, a lot of the newer characters are such children to him that he would feel like, I feel like he would be like, I'm talking to children. I'm like, and I don't think that that's true of every adult character in the series, but he is someone who is like very aware of people's positions in the world and who he is and the effect he has on people. Idris Elba voice. That I think that he sees them as a new generation, but that's a group thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and like he would have the strongest connection with Poe, also based on age, because maybe Poe is the oldest of the that lot, especially because I mean, Leia's gone, Luke's gone. I'm trying to think of other human characters
that are involved.
Non-human characters. Yeah, it's kind of like they're all young.
I'd be interested. I don't think there's like in that fan fiction sort of way, just him and Cassian, I think, would be interesting.
Oh yeah, they would be.
Just in terms of people who do messy things. Like
See, I don't. Yeah, I agree. I don't think Lando would like him.
Yeah, but I want
to. Yeah, because Andor crosses a line that Lando doesn't cross. I think
that he has the moment where he decided not to cross it too. I think is also an important thing. So, but I think that makes it. I think the thing with Lando is I think the characters that has the most interesting spark with him and that he would have a connection with are not necessarily the ones he likes the most. And so I think that he would, in ways, Cassian is like the extreme version of what's interesting about him and Poe in conversation, right? So I think that Lando would understand him and not like that. Which I think would be super interesting. But I also think that there are, I don't know, I feel like he's just like, I'm here to help the kids. I'm not here to make friends with the kids.
Yeah, and because also when he meets Rey, there's already a distance because Rey's like, oh, this is General Calrissian who's destroyed the Death Star kind of thing. And he being 50 years older or more, is
almost
like,
60,
yes.
almost 60,
and a father,
right.
Like he has his own hang-ups about children, and I think that that's fair. So I feel so like I think that's also a big part of it. But also I think he would say Lando when he would say out of all the movies, definitely his least favorite is Han, and he wants to tell you about it loudly. And list all the reasons why he would until push comes to shove.
And then so my last question for you all, unless you guys want to keep talking about Lando, which I feel like any of us could do for a while, is for people that like, what is something that you want to impress on people? It'll be twofold. One, for people that want to write or portray Lando, whether that's just like for fun, like in fanfic or something like that, people just in the fandom, not professionally. And two, about how the fandom discusses Lando as a character.
I think for people who want to write Lando, he is easy in a way because he's so well defined on the screen version. So, like, if it's Billy D. Williams or Donald Glover, when I was writing Shadow of the Sith, he just kind of just flowed on the page, just like because it's Lando being Lando. So, in a way, of all the characters in Star Wars of that original trilogy or the main characters, like he's quite easy. Having said that, it's probably quite easy to get wrong as well. And that's what I said at the beginning. It's like because he's so well defined, you have to be able to capture that. Because if you get it wrong, then someone will notice immediately. Because these are characters with any Star Wars character that we've known and loved for 40. How many years? 7 years. Lando is like less, 45 years. But yeah, so like to me, it's like it's Billy D. Williams and it's Donald Glover, and that's your baseline, and you go from there.
For me, I feel like the most important thing to recognize is when you're tackling him as a creator, there's what's true, there's what he thinks is true, and what he wants you to believe is true. And it is a Venn diagram. And when you hit the middle, you better have a darn good reason why all three are the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some of the strongest and best parts of a Lando story is when all three are the same. But they are things you have to earn. And I think that as a writer, because we know everything that's true in our story, theoretically, it's easy to have those 3 points overlap. And for some characters, they often do, right? For Lando, those are a juggling act, you know, especially what he wants and believes is true about himself.
Mm.
And I feel that can also be related to, well, in general, fandom talking about characters, but I feel that that's particularly true when we discuss Lando as fans, right? That he is one of those characters that even when he is sure he's being honest, we as an audience should ask, but is that true?
Mm-hmm.
And does he know that it's true, or does he know that it's not true? And I think that a lot of character debates can go more smoothly if we separate that character's internal life with what the actual reality of the scenario is. Like in the same way we were talking about the bad rap about Cloud City, you know, what is his internal reality versus what is the actual known reality by the audience.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I definitely don't write Lando in a fan fiction capacity at all. So I'm not taking any of those words to heart at all. No, not at all. But thank you both for coming on. Before we go, if you have any of your upcoming work or current work that you want to plug, go for it. I'll start with you, Danny. Oh, and let people know where they can find you.
Hey guys, I'm Danny Lore. You can find me on some social media sites that let me use words under Weredogs, WEREDAWGZ. Because I have a brand and it's werewolves. And currently, I am working for Marvel on Blood Hunt Dracula, some good Dracula and Brielle, daughter of Blade goodness. Just throwing them at hordes of monsters. It's been good fun.
It sounds so good. Oh my god!
They were like, "Do you want to write Dracula and Brielle?" And I was like, "Do I want to?" I'm a Tomb of Horrors, you know, like old school Dracula, Werewolf by Night, like nerd. So I was like, absolutely. And I've been really blessed to co-create and work on Brielle's stuff, and it's been like so much fun. And then in terms of longer form, I did a novella with Janelle Monáe in the Memory Librarian called Nevermind. It's been out a while, but I'm a big fan of it. And if you're listening to this, you probably like sci-fi. So that's a good, fun one to check out.
Thanks. And Adam?
What can I say? It's like I'm in a weird place where I am doing 6 things I can't talk about.
Oh.
Which is great. But also, like,
congratulations on Redacted.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's going to be good. So I've got stuff coming out this year, and I've got stuff coming out next year, and you'll just have to wait.
Yep.
And yeah, you can find me on social media, various places. My website is adamchristopher.me. Yeah, I'm around. I'm not hard to find. But yeah, that's like the worst kind of answer. It's like I can't stuff, things, books.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the the most interesting things when talking to authors is saying like, oh yeah, I'm working. Oh wait, I can't talk about that. Not yet. Give it some time. Or when someone's like, I think the announcement's in like a week and I still can't say anything yet.
But like, it sounds kind of, I'm hyper aware of this. It sounds pretentious. And like,
it always does. I feel so bad saying it, but it's like, it's true.
It's like, I'm so
excited.
important. Yeah, I'm so important that I'm writing these things, which I can't talk about because it's also exciting. But like, it just puts you in this kind of position where I'm stuck on a podcast going, well, things.
Hey, as a lawyer, I get it. I can appreciate that. Be like, yeah, don't you talk about it if you're not supposed to. I am not getting involved in that. Yeah, but thank you again for coming on. I hope you all enjoyed it. I know I did. For everyone that's listening, I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of Star Wars Sidebars Conversations. Make sure you check out Danny and Adam's upcoming work. Make sure you check out their past work and support them on all the social medias. Remember, until next time, as the smoothest general in the galaxy has said, there are more of us. Take care.